Okay, remember last week, in the previous lectures, we covered about what OS overview. Without an OS system, what is OS services, multitasking and multiprocessing, and types of OS. We did discuss about user view, and next we will discuss about internal view. So last week, before I end the class, I did go through with you user interface, the primary function and secondary function of user view, or user interface, or in short form we call UI or GUI. And all of you can run through this slide again. Like what I said, it is quite a light slide, easy slide for you to understand, and all of you are quite familiar with all these areas. Three different approaches that we cover: command interface using command line, CLI, command language, and API. Typical OS user services, which you guys are doing it every day with your system, such as loading and execution of program files, giving some file commands, user I/O services, security and data integrity, inter-user communication and data sharing, checking system status and using some administration tool if required. And most of the time, all of you will be doing I/O activities, dealing with file, and specialized services for user program. So these are typical OS user services that you do or you perform, to your Windows or to your Linux or to your Mac every day, on daily basis. And then we did discuss about UI utilities, typical OS user services like what we discussed earlier, program execution, what you do with program. Either you run some commands, command line, or you use some dialog box. Nowadays, we don't do batch processing anymore, but yes, maybe sometimes you do. File commands, which are very basic. When you use your Windows Explorer or File Explorer, you might be doing all this, opening a file, saving a file, things like that, renaming, editing, when it comes to the files or directories, manipulation of files. So all this comes under file management system, which are very basic, and you do this on daily basis. These are known as file related commands. Common file commands, which you guys are very familiar with. If you need any further clarification, let me know. The commands in Windows and Linux or Unix are completely different. You can try this out. To KL students, I have taught or I have shared all these during their diploma level itself or during the basic course. And again, if you are interested, you can try all this. I'm not supposed to cover this here, but I assume that all of you are familiar with this. And if any one of you needs any additional assistance from me, let me know. I/O device command, like what we covered last week, you can do formatting, copying entire disk, sending output to screen or printer. You can do scheduling, queuing system, mounting, unmounting. But normally we don't do all this with with Windows. But when you use Linux and Unix, you might be doing all this by giving commands. In Windows, you just use GUI, GUI. Security and data integrity protection as well. You use antivirus software to manage your security and data integrity protection. For example, protection from unauthorized read, write, execution. We don't do much in Windows, but if you work in a Linux or Unix environment, every file need to be set this, right? With the RW or R only or W only or D, right? So that is common in Linux and Unix, but not very much in Windows. In Windows, the OS will take care of that. protection from deletion. Yeah, you can set some what we call alerts or commands before delete, asking you, are you sure, yes or no, something like that can be set it up. Because when you use Linux or Unix, there is no such protection. If you give command delete, it will delete straight away at the command line, but not at the GUI. Okay, so that is the difference between Unix and Windows. Windows, of course, we use ACL, allow the system administrator to control access by for each directory and files in Linux, yeah, file by file. Use interface communication and disk sharing operation that we discussed last week. Program sharing, in terms of program sharing, you share your files or program with someone else. Data file sharing and data integrity issues. Multiple users working on a single document, especially when you work at the server levels, not at your PC level. Or sharing databases. OS messaging passing services such as through email, FTP, file transfer protocol, terminal facilities, for example, Telnet and SSH, HTTP, instant messaging, audio and video conferencing. All these services are being provided by OS for you to use it as a user or as an administrator. So this is how user or admin communicate to the system, yeah, through the proper layers in order to get your job done. OS services to permit program to communicate with one another. Sometimes in a command, we use command. Otherwise, we use GUI to do that. All right. So these are some of other services or facilities that allows us to work on OS. In terms of system status information and user administration, we can give commands at the CLI, command line interface, or at Linux in order to find out amount of available disk space, amount of available memory, number of users on the system, and so on. So some system related information. Of course, you have other option as well. Besides using the command line, you can also look at task manager, or you also can look at control panel to get all this information, especially for the admin, yeah, not for the user. And also there are some login facilities that OS allows admin and users to make use of it, such as turn features on and off, set network connection, control programs, real-time graph of dynamic to see the performance through the task manager, and so on. So these are some of the admin job that users can perform at certain level if you have the proper right and access. Otherwise, admin, user administrator or administrator, system administrator will do all this job using OS. Doesn't matter whether it is a Windows, Linux, or Unix. In terms of program services, what are the services that you can do with OS? Like what we discussed earlier, file services, IO services, API. All right, so we have covered a number of very basic common topics. In the next couple of slides, we're going to look at user interface, the common user interface that all of you are very familiar with because you are not a certificate or diploma student, you are a degree student. All this should be very common to you. That's the reason why I told you in the beginning, this subject is a very basic subject, but don't underestimate. Two major types of interface design. One is CLI, command line interface, and GUI. Web browser is another type of interface, but not part of the OS. but a lot of communication today is happening through the web browser. You can also use web browser for some purposes. Command line interface, I'm not going to run through with you. Most of you are familiar with this command line, DOS, this operating command or PowerShell. Play around with it if you're not familiar. Those who are using Linux or familiar with Linux, I am very sure you are familiar with some of the commands in Linux that you can do. It's quite similar to DOS or Windows. Yeah. Okay. I just would like to have an option. If any one of you would like me to go through into the detail of this, you let me know, especially in the command line using DOS or PowerShell. Otherwise, I leave it to you because I'm not supposed to go into the detail or showing you how to use the command line. I have covered this with my student in diploma levels or certificate. I hope the student from other centers also, you would have done this during your diploma or certificate level instead of a degree. How to use wildcard, for example, for your command lines, using the question mark replaces a single character, the asterisk replaces the wildcard, the wild characters, and so on. Batch system, we hardly cover this nowadays unless you write a script, or we call it like JCL, job control language. Nowadays, we hardly do this unless you are working in Unix environment or Linux environment. You might need to do this. Yeah. So to process or to carry on jobs in batches, you have to write a few commands. In Windows, we can do this by using files with the extension of .bat, batch. But hardly we do this nowadays because it's all overtaken by scripts, JavaScript, PHP script, and so on. Yeah. So scripting, for example, the shell scripting is where you do multiple jobs, or you call it batch job in one file or in one program. Yeah. Okay. GUI, I don't have to go through with you. GUI, all of you are very familiar with GUI. Example of GUI for Linux, KDE, Macintosh, for touchless gesture or screen, touch screen. Examples, GUI versus command line, some advantages and disadvantages. So please read through this on your own, very basic stuff. I'm not going to spend my time here. Web-based GUI and further reading. All right. This is on user view, okay, on user view.